The most consumed breakfast food in the world was invented by a man who was afraid of you, not of disease, not of hunger, of what you might do at night. What history books left out about cornflakes is not a footnote, it is the entire story. The invention of breakfast cereal was not an accident of a busy kitchen. It was a calculated medical intervention, an attempt by one of the most powerful institutional voices in 19th-century America to regulate the human body through its stomach. John Harvey Kellogg did not stumble onto cornflakes. He designed them, and he designed them as a weapon. That is the argument this video makes, and it is a defensible one. The primary sources are not obscure. The man wrote it down, multiple times, in published books, in sanitarium pamphlets, in lectures delivered to audiences of thousands. The reason this story gets told as a quirky food history anecdote rather than what it actually is, a story about institutional medicine using diet as a tool of social control, is that the quirky version sells better. This is the other version. The year is 1876. Battle Creek, Michigan, population under 5,000, a railroad town with a modest economy and no particular reason to matter to history, except that sitting at the edge of this town is a building that is about to become one of the most influential medical institutions in the United States. The Western Health Reform Institute, later renamed the Battle Creek Sanitarium. The man running it is 34 years old. He has a medical degree from Bellevue Hospital Medical College in New York. He holds the editorship of a national health journal with a circulation in the hundreds of thousands. He is also a baptized Seventh-day Adventist, the faith that founded the institution he now directs, and that faith does not occupy a corner of his thinking. It is the architecture of everything he believes about the human body. His name is John Harvey Kellogg. And the most important thing to understand about Kellogg, the thing that makes the cornflake story make sense, is that he never separated medicine from theology. To Kellogg, the body was not a biological system operating according to natural processes. It was a moral battleground. The stomach, the nerves, the bowels, the reproductive organs, all of it was caught in a war between discipline and corruption, between what he called purity and what he considered the great physical and spiritual catastrophe threatening the American nation. That catastrophe had a name. He called it self-abuse. To understand what Kellogg was building at Battle Creek, you have to understand the medical consensus he was operating inside, because the late 19th century was not a fringe era for sexual panic. It was the institutional peak of it. The dominant medical theory of the period held that the human nervous system operated on a finite supply of vital energy. Every expenditure of that energy, physical, mental, sexual, drew from the same limited reserve. Masturbation, in this framework, was not merely a moral failing, it was a physiological catastrophe, a direct drain on the nervous system. The documented medical literature of the period attributed to it an extraordinary range of diseases: epilepsy, blindness, insanity, tuberculosis, and a general wasting of the body and mind that physicians of the era called neurasthenia. This was not fringe pseudoscience. This was published in the major medical journals of the day. It was taught in medical schools. It was endorsed by figures whose institutional authority was, in their era, unimpeachable. Kellogg did not invent this theory, he weaponized it. His 1879 book, Plain Facts for Old and Young, is one of the most remarkable documents in American medical history. It runs to nearly 500 pages. Roughly a third of it is devoted to what Kellogg calls the solitary vice, described in clinical detail as the root cause of an almost limitless catalogue of physical and mental disease. He lists 39 signs that a person may be practicing self-abuse. He advocates, in cases of persistent habit, surgical intervention. He was not embarrassed by this. He published it under his name. He sold it through his sanitarium. He revised and expanded it repeatedly across the following decades. The relevant question for our purposes is, what does any of this have to do with cornflakes? Everything. Kellogg's theory of the body, built from Adventist theology, nervous energy medicine, and his own particular species of moral certainty, produced a dietary philosophy as extreme as anything practiced by a 19th-century physician. The premise was straightforward. If the nervous system determined a person's capacity for self-control, and if self-control determined a person's resistance to sexual temptation, then the nervous system was the battlefield. And one of the primary influences on nervous system function, in the medical thinking of the era, was diet. Specifically, meat. Kellogg believed, and argued at length, with the confidence of someone who did not entertain serious doubt, that a diet high in meat inflamed the passions, that the animal proteins and fats of a carnivorous diet literally excited the nerves. That the working class and immigrant populations consuming heavy meat-based diets were not merely unhealthy in the conventional sense, but were physiologically predisposed to exactly the kind of sexual incontinence that Kellogg considered a chief threat to American civilization. The solution, therefore, was grain, simple, bland, easily digestible grain, food that would move through the digestive system without irritation, without stimulation, without the nerve-exciting properties of meat or spice or richness of any kind, food that would leave the nervous system calm. Calm enough, Kellogg believed, to resist temptation. This is what he was building toward. The first grain product to come out of the Battle Creek Sanitarium was not cornflakes. It was something called granola, a twice-baked mixture of wheat, oatmeal and cornmeal, crumbled and served with milk. Kellogg borrowed the concept from an earlier reformer named James Caleb Jackson, who had developed a similar product called granula at his own sanitarium in New York. Kellogg renamed it, refined it, and began serving it to the patients at Battle Creek. But granola required overnight soaking. It was hard on the teeth, and Kellogg was thinking bigger. In 1894, while experimenting in the sanitarium kitchen with his brother William Keith Kellogg, Will, as everyone called him, John Harvey, accidentally left a batch of boiled wheat sitting out. When they returned to it, the wheat had staled. John Harvey decided to run it through the roller anyway. Instead of producing a single sheet of dough, the dried wheat flattened into individual flakes. They baked the flakes, they tasted them, and something clicked. This was it. This was the food Kellogg had been working toward. Light, digestible, bland enough to be inoffensive to the most delicate nervous system. Easy to prepare, easy to serve. A food that could replace the morning meat of the American breakfast table without the inflammatory properties he considered meat's central danger. He called the product granose, wheat flakes, and within a year, the sanitarium was mailing tens of thousands of cases of granose to former patients across the country. The corn version, the one that became cornflakes, came shortly after. Different grain, same logic, same purpose. And here is the first place the story fractures from the polished version you may have heard. Kellogg was not thinking about the breakfast market. He was thinking about the bowel, and beneath the bowel, the nerve, and beneath the nerve, the specific set of behaviors he had built his entire career on eliminating. If you have found something in the last few minutes that reframes something you thought you understood, the like button is one of the more honest responses to that feeling. Now here is the thing that genuinely complicates this story. Before we go further, let me say plainly what this video can and cannot establish. What it can establish, Kellogg's stated purpose for developing bland grain foods was explicitly connected, in his own published writing, to the suppression of what he called nervous excitability and sexual appetite. That is documented. That is in the primary sources. What it cannot establish with certainty, whether bland cereal actually does what Kellogg believed it did. The nervous energy model of human sexuality was wrong. Kellogg was working inside a scientific paradigm that has been thoroughly discredited. The mechanism he believed in did not operate the way he believed it operated. The claim is not that cornflakes suppress desire. The claim is that the man who invented them believed they did, and designed them with that belief as the explicit animating purpose. That is a different and more defensible claim. And the primary sources support it entirely. The patent was filed by the Kellogg brothers in 1906. By that point, Battle Creek had become something neither of them fully anticipated. Word of the sanitarium's grain-based diet had spread. Former patients had gone home talking about it. The food itself was being mailed to subscribers, and around Battle Creek in the 1890s and into the early 1900s, something remarkable was happening. Other people were beginning to manufacture their own versions of the grain flake products the Kellogg Sanitarium had pioneered. The most consequential of these people was a former patient. His name was Charles William Post. Post had arrived at Battle Creek in 1891, a genuinely ill man in his mid-30s, exhausted, unable to hold food, struggling with what the doctors of the era called nervous prostration. He spent 9 months at the sanitarium. He left, by his own account, not fully cured by Kellogg's methods. He then opened his own sanitarium nearby, called La Vita Inn, began experimenting with the grain food formulas he had encountered at Battle Creek, and within a few years had produced 2 products that would make him one of the wealthiest men in America. Grape nuts in 1895. Then, in 1904, a cornflake product he called Elijah's Manna, renamed Post Toasties after the religious name, provoked objection from clergy in Britain. Post understood something Kellogg either refused to understand or genuinely could not see. The product was not medicine. It was breakfast, and breakfast, sold correctly, was not a sanitarium treatment for nervous disorders. It was a convenience food for a country that was industrializing at speed, filling cities, filling factory shifts, filling mornings with schedules that left no room for the long-cooked meat breakfasts of an earlier era. Post became a millionaire, then a multimillionaire, and Kellogg watched from Battle Creek with something that, in the historical record, reads remarkably like contempt. The split between the brothers, John Harvey and Will, is one of the stranger stories inside this already strange story. Will Kellogg had been working in his brother's shadow for over 2 decades. He managed the sanitarium's operations, handled its finances, oversaw its staff, and had been present in that kitchen when the wheat flake was discovered. His contribution to the development of the cornflake was substantial. His compensation was minimal. His authority was subordinate to his brother's in every meaningful sense. What changed everything was sugar. Will wanted to add a small amount of sugar to the cornflake formula. The product tasted better with it. Consumers preferred it. In a market that was now competitive, Post had demonstrated that, taste was not irrelevant. John Harvey was opposed, not just resistant, opposed in principle. To add sugar to a food designed to calm the nervous system was, in his framework, to corrupt its central purpose. The flakes were not meant to taste good, they were meant to do a physiological job. Making them pleasant was making them something else entirely. Will proceeded without John Harvey's approval in 1906, founding the Battle Creek Toasted Corn Flake Company. John Harvey sued. The litigation ran for years. Will eventually won, and the product that entered the American market, sweetened, branded, mass-produced, was Will's product, not John Harvey's. It was a breakfast food. It was not a treatment. It was not a corrective. It carried not a trace of the philosophy that had produced it. John Harvey Kellogg spent the rest of his life watching his brother sell the sanitized version of his life's work to a country that had no idea what it was originally built to do. He did not consider this progress. By 1915, the Battle Creek area had over 40 cereal companies operating within a few miles of each other. The grain flake had gone from a sanitarium treatment to a national industry in under 2 decades. The market Kellogg had not intended to create was generating revenues that dwarfed everything the sanitarium had ever earned. And here is what the industry did with its origin. It buried it, not conspiratorially, not through active suppression, simply through the ordinary commercial logic of brand building. You do not sell a product by telling consumers it was invented by a man who believed their bodies were moral catastrophes in need of correction. You sell it with wheat fields and wholesome families and the promise of a good morning. The story that survived, the one most history books carry today, is a version of accidental genius, a rushed kitchen experiment, a happy mistake, the framing that emphasizes the discovery, the innovation, the American entrepreneurialism of it. The framing that leaves out the 500-page book about self-abuse, the surgical interventions, the nerve-calming dietary philosophy, and the theological framework inside which all of it made sense to the man who built it. This channel is not interested in the comfortable version. If you want the version of food history that actually explains where the food came from, not just what it looks like on the shelf, but what the person who made it believed about the body and what they were trying to do to it, this is the right place. Here is the specific thing worth sitting with before this video ends. Before the Kellogg Cornflake concept pocket, let me name what is actually happening in this history, because it is easy to walk away from it with the wrong frame. The moral hygiene mechanism, the term for the broader 19th-century practice of using diet, environment, and institutional medicine to regulate behaviors considered morally or socially threatening, not unique to Kellogg, not unique to Adventism. A widespread feature of a particular moment in American and European institutional medicine, where the body was simultaneously understood as a medical object and a moral subject, where what you ate, how you slept, and what your nerves did at night were all understood as domains of legitimate institutional management. Kellogg was the most consequential expression of this mechanism in American food history, but he was not its inventor. The mechanism is the villain here, not simply the man. Modern analogy: a pharmaceutical intervention designed to treat a diagnosed condition that turns out to be a condition invented to justify the intervention. The drug works. The disease was constructed. The treatment and the diagnosis shared the same interest. The reason this matters beyond food history: the sweetened, mass-produced breakfast cereal that entered the American market in the early 20th century was not actually what Kellogg made. It was a commercial product built on the infrastructure of something else entirely: the distribution network, the consumer habits, the idea that grain belonged at the breakfast table. All of that came from Kellogg's Sanitarium enterprise. But the thing that built the sanitarium enterprise, the theology, the sexual panic, the moral framework that made bland grain food seem like medicine that got stripped out when Will Kellogg added the sugar. What you have left is a delivery mechanism without the ideology, an infrastructure without the philosophy. A breakfast food whose origin story most people don't know, sold by brands that have spent a century making sure they don't need to. The most eaten grain at the American breakfast table was put there, originally, by a man who was trying to stop people from doing something that had nothing to do with breakfast. If there is someone in your life who would genuinely stop mid-scroll when they found that out, the share option is right there. There is a question this story opens that it cannot fully close. Kellogg's Battle Creek Sanitarium was not purely about sexual suppression, it was also a racial project. The language of American civilization in his published writing carries the specific demographic anxieties of a late 19th century Anglo-Protestant institution looking at a country filling with immigrants, filling with formerly enslaved people, filling with bodies that the institutional medicine of the era was extremely interested in classifying and managing. The full history of who the nervous energy theory was applied to, whose bodies were considered most at risk, whose appetites were considered most dangerous, whose diets were most urgently in need of correction, is a longer story than this video can hold. It is the video that comes next on this channel. What did the institution that gave us breakfast actually believe about the bodies it was trying to feed? That question has an answer, and the answer is more uncomfortable than the cornflake story. Before the close, you are probably somewhere ordinary right now, a room you know well. And if there is a box of cereal anywhere near you, it has been there your whole life, part of the furniture of mourning. The next time you look at it, you will know something about where it came from that changes what it means to have it there. That is not comfortable knowledge. It was not meant to be. The story of how the American breakfast table was built was not written by people who trusted the body. It was written by people who feared it. And the products they designed to manage that fear outlasted them by a century, sitting on shelves that carry no record of the philosophy that put them there. John Harvey Kellogg died in 1943. He had spent his final decades watching the industry he had inadvertently created market itself as wholesome, natural, and good. He did not believe it was any of those things. He believed it had been corrupted, sweetened into something unrecognizable, stripped of the moral purpose that had made it matter. He was wrong about what the body is. He was wrong about what desire means. He was wrong about the mechanism he believed grain could interrupt, but he was also, in his own way, completely serious, and the industry he accidentally started never was. The question for the comments is specific. When you learned what cornflakes were originally made to do, what was the first other food product you thought of? The one whose origin story you now suspect might look like this one if someone actually went looking. Write it below, the answer that comes to mind before you can talk yourself out of it.